It started as a routine hike. I had chosen a trail known for its serene beauty and isolation, a perfect escape from the daily grind. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, everything seemed perfect. But as the path twisted and turned deeper into the woods, things began to feel off. I had been hiking for hours, following what seemed like a well-marked trail. The deeper I went, the more the forest began to change. The trees grew denser, their shadows longer and darker. It felt like I was walking into another world, one that was both familiar and strange. Then I stumbled upon it, a tunnel. It wasn't on any map, nor had I seen any signs indicating it. It was just there, a gaping dark hole in the earth, as if someone had dug a giant pit in the middle of the forest. My curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to investigate. I stepped into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing me as I ventured further inside. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom, revealing walls of rough, damp stone. The air was musty, and I could hear the distant echo of dripping water. It felt endless. As I walked, the tunnel seemed to stretch on forever. My sense of time and direction became distorted. I kept expecting to see light at the end, but it never came. It was as if the tunnel was alive, shifting and changing as I moved through it. After what felt like hours, I noticed something peculiar. Doors. They were spaced out at irregular intervals along the tunnel, each one made of old wood and covered in strange symbols. My heart raced as I approached the first door. I hesitated, but something compelled me to open it. The door creaked open, and I was immediately hit with a wave of nostalgia. I found myself standing in my childhood bedroom. The room was just as I remembered it. Posters on the walls, toys scattered across the floor, and a small bed with a superhero-themed blanket. I could almost smell the faint scent of crayons and old books. I stepped inside, my heart aching with memories. The room was filled with echoes of laughter and the distant sound of my parents talking. But as I looked around, the room started to change. The walls seemed to close in, and the toys became twisted and menacing. The laughter turned into eerie whispers, and the comforting warmth turned cold. Panic surged through me. I slammed the door shut, trying to regain my composure. When I turned back to the tunnel, it was just as dark and endless as before. I kept moving, desperate to find a way out. I came across another door. This one was covered in rust and had a faint, musty smell. With trembling hands, I opened it. I was met with the sight of my teenage years, my high school classroom. The desks, the blackboard, the chatter of classmates. It was all there. But again, the scene didn't stay pleasant for long. The faces of my classmates became distorted, their voices turning into mocking laughter. The walls of the classroom seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of unresolved anxieties and pressures from those years. I slammed the door shut once more, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. Each door I opened seemed to take me deeper into a painful part of my past. There were doors to old friendships, to lost loves, to moments I wished I could forget. Each door held a fragment of my history, but each fragment was twisted into a nightmare. I began to feel the weight of each memory pressing down on me, each door more terrifying than the last. I realized that the tunnel was not just a physical place, but a manifestation of my unresolved issues and regrets. It was like walking through the darkest corners of my mind, confronting things I had buried away for years. Desperation took over as I ran through the tunnel, searching for an exit, hoping that somewhere in this labyrinth, I could find a way out. My mind raced through every door I had opened, every moment I had relived. The tunnel seemed to mock my efforts, stretching and contorting, making it feel like I was running in circles. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. It was a soft, inviting glow, the first hint of hope I had seen since entering the tunnel. I pushed myself towards it, ignoring the doors that seemed to reach out for me. I reached the light and stepped through it, and suddenly I was back in the forest, the sun shining warmly on my face. The tunnel was gone, replaced by the familiar trail I had started on. It felt like waking from a long, terrible dream. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The forest was still as beautiful as before, but I felt a profound sense of relief. I had faced my past, confronted my fears, and somehow managed to escape. As I made my way back to the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that the tunnel had changed me. I had faced parts of myself I hadn't wanted to see, and although it was terrifying, it had also given me a new perspective on my own life and the importance of facing one's fears. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the cold. My body shivered uncontrollably and I could see my breath misting in the dim light of the room. I blinked open my eyes, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The room was small, sparsely furnished with a wooden bed, a rickety chair, and a single window with grimy glass. It took a few moments for my groggy brain to register that I was lying on a narrow bed with an old, threadbare blanket. My head throbbed, and I could barely remember how I had ended up here. My mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of memories, but everything was a blur. I sat up slowly, feeling a sharp pain in my neck. My heart pounded with anxiety as I realized I had no idea where I was or how I had gotten there. I was completely alone. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin as it settled. I pushed myself out of bed and stumbled to the window. Peering through the grime-covered glass, I saw nothing but trees. Tall, dense trees stretching as far as the eye could see. The woods were thick and dark, with no sign of civilization. I was completely isolated. My phone was missing. I reached for my pockets, hoping to find my keys or anything that might help, but there was nothing. I was utterly unprepared, with no idea how to get out of this predicament. The cabin was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves outside. I noticed a door on the far side of the room, leading to what I hoped was an exit. With a deep breath, I walked over and tried the handle. It was locked. I shook it, hoping it would give, but it remained firmly shut. Panic began to set in. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but my voice sounded hollow and weak in the confined space. No one answered. I could only hear the muffled sounds of the forest outside. Desperate, I turned my attention to the rest of the cabin. There was a small kitchenette with a rusty stove and a sink, but no food or water. I searched through the drawers, finding only old, dusty utensils and a single flashlight with dead batteries. As I continued to explore, I noticed something unsettling. A series of photographs on the wall, pinned with old-fashioned pushpins. The images were faded and yellowed with age, showing various people, some smiling, some serious. I didn't recognize any of them, but each photograph was dated with a year that seemed to stretch back decades. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was watching me. Every time I glanced at a photo or moved to a new area, I felt like there was something lurking just out of sight. The silence grew heavier, and every small noise seemed magnified. I turned back to the window, hoping to see someone approaching, but the forest remained still. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. I felt a growing sense of dread as darkness enveloped the cabin. The darkness was almost oppressive. I grabbed the flashlight, but when I turned it on, it flickered weakly before going out completely. I was left in near total darkness, my anxiety escalating as I stumbled around the cabin, trying to find another source of light. As I groped in the darkness, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the door. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to listen. The scratching was accompanied by low, guttural noises that sent chills down my spine. I backed away from the door, my heart racing. I had to find a way out before whatever was outside got in. I turned my attention to the small fireplace in the corner of the room. It was cold and unused, but I searched through the ashes and found a few old fire starters and some kindling. Using a match I found in a drawer, I managed to get a small fire going. The flickering light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the photograph seem even more sinister. The warmth from the fire was a small comfort, but the scratching noises continued, growing louder and more frantic. The sound of the door being rattled and pounded made it clear that whatever was outside was trying to get in. My mind raced with fear and desperation. I needed to find a way to escape. I checked the window again, but it was too high off the ground and wouldn't open. The only other option was to try to break down the door, but I had nothing to use as a battering ram. My panic reached a fever pitch as I felt the walls closing in around me. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of what might be outside. Then I heard a new sound. A door creaking open slowly. I turned around, my heart pounding, and saw the door to the outside slowly inch open. The darkened forest loomed beyond it, and I had no idea what awaited me out there. But the option of staying in the cabin seemed even more terrifying. With a final glance around the cabin, I made a run for it, sprinting through the open door and into the forest. The cool night air hit me like a splash of cold water. I ran blindly, trying to put as much distance between myself and the cabin as possible. As I ran through the trees, I realized that I might never understand how I ended up in that cabin, or what had been lurking outside. But one thing was certain. I had to keep moving, keep searching for a way back to safety. The forest was dark and treacherous, but I was driven by a primal need to escape. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. I knew I had to find help, but for now, all I could do was keep running and hope that I would find my way out before it was too late. They say the woods have a way of calling people. I never believed it until that day. The day I decided to take a solo hike through the forest, seeking peace and solitude. What I found instead was something far more sinister. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, a well-marked trail, a few hours of walking, and then back home by sunset. I packed lightly, just some water, snacks, and a map, confident that I wouldn't need much. The trailhead was quiet when I arrived, just the sound of birds chirping and the rustle of leaves underfoot. Perfect, I thought. No distractions, no people, just me and nature. The first few hours were blissful. The air was crisp, the forest alive with the sounds of wildlife, and the path was easy to follow. I felt a deep sense of calm, the stress of daily life melting away with each step I took further into the woods. But then something strange happened. The trail began to change. It was subtle at first. A slight deviation here, a bend that I didn't remember seeing on the map. I paused, checking the map and my surroundings. Everything looked right, yet there was an uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. I continued, brushing off the feeling as paranoia. After all, I had been on hikes before. But the further I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew taller and denser, blocking out the sunlight. The once well-trodden path became narrower, overgrown with weeds and twisted roots. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, barely visible through the trees, just standing there. My heart skipped a beat, but when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. But the unease in my gut was growing stronger. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach a clearing or a familiar landmark. But the trail seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways. It was like the forest was playing with me, leading me in circles. I pulled out my map again, but it was useless. The landmarks and directions didn't match what I was seeing around me. It was as if I had wandered into a different place altogether. As the day wore on, the forest grew darker. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. Panic began to set in. I was lost, completely and utterly lost. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea where I was or how to get back. I tried retracing my steps, but every path looked the same, every tree identical to the last. The air grew colder, and the forest, once alive with the sounds of nature, became deathly silent. My footsteps seemed to echo, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting. Then I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It was coming from all around me, as if the trees themselves were speaking. I called out, hoping it was another hiker, but there was no response, only the whispers. They seemed to grow more urgent, more insistent, pulling me deeper into the woods. I was no longer walking with purpose. I was being guided, led by something unseen. I stumbled and fell, my hand scraping against the rough bark of a tree as I tried to catch myself. When I looked up, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A figure stood in the distance, shrouded in shadow. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching me. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure slowly began to move toward me, its footsteps eerily silent. I finally found the strength to move. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from whatever that thing was. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs felt like they would burst. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, no end in sight. But the whispers never left, always just at the edge of hearing, guiding me deeper and deeper. Finally, I burst into a small clearing. The sudden openness was jarring after the claustrophobic darkness of the forest. The whispers stopped. The forest was silent again, but this time the silence felt different, oppressive, like the calm before a storm. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, when I saw it. In the center of the clearing was a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked ancient, the wood weathered and rotten, the windows dark and lifeless. It shouldn't have been there. Nothing about it made sense. But something inside me knew I had no choice. I had to go inside. With trembling hands, I pushed open the door. The inside was as eerie as the outside, filled with old, broken furniture and the smell of decay. But on the far wall, something caught my eye. A mirror, old and cracked, covered in a thin layer of dust. I approached it cautiously. As I stared into the mirror, something began to appear. Words slowly forming in the dust. My breath caught in my throat as I read them. "You were never meant to leave." My heart stopped. The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a hike gone wrong. I hadn't just wandered off the trail. I had been led here, drawn into the forest, into this place where time and reality twisted in unnatural ways. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the cabin with their eerie, disembodied voices. The figure from the forest appeared in the mirror, standing behind me, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the empty cabin, silent and still. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen in terror, but eventually I found the strength to move. I fled the cabin. The sun was just rising, casting the forest in a golden light as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The forest had let me go, but it had left its mark on me. The whispers, the figure, the words in the mirror, they would stay with me forever. I've always been drawn to the forest, the serenity, the quiet, and the feeling of being so far removed from the chaos of life have a way of soothing my mind. But there's one part of the forest I had always avoided, a section that locals referred to as the Black Hollow. It was said to be a place where the sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy of trees, where even the animals refused to go. The stories about Black Hollow were countless, whispers of strange noises, shadows that moved on their own, and an unshakable feeling of being watched. One day, curiosity got the better of me. I was determined to explore Black Hollow, to see if the tales were nothing more than local folklore. Armed with a flashlight, a small knife, and a sense of determination, I set out toward the heart of the forest, aiming to reach the fabled hollow before nightfall. The deeper I went, the more the forest began to change. The trees, once lush and vibrant, became gnarled and twisted. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. It was as if the forest itself was trying to warn me, to turn me back before it was too late. But I pressed on. As I approached Black Hollow, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The usual sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, were gone. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. It was unnerving, but I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The entrance to Black Hollow was marked by a line of ancient towering trees that seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a natural archway. As I stepped through, the world around me changed. The air became colder, and a thick fog began to swirl around my feet. My flashlight, which had been cutting through the darkness with ease, now barely illuminated the path ahead. I walked slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and the trees pressed in on either side, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Every step I took echoed in the oppressive silence, amplifying the unease that had settled in my gut. Then, I heard it, a faint rustling sound, just beyond the edge of the flashlight's beam. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was too deliberate to be the wind, too heavy to be a small animal. I swung the flashlight in the direction of the noise, but there was nothing there, just the dense, impenetrable wall of trees. I continued walking, but the rustling followed me, growing louder, more insistent. My heart raced as I realized I was not alone. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I quickened my pace, the need to get out of Black Hollow growing stronger with each passing second. Suddenly, the path opened up into a small clearing, the fog lifting slightly to reveal a strange, circular patch of ground devoid of vegetation. The trees around the clearing were blackened and twisted, their bark scorched as if by fire. In the center of the clearing stood an old, weathered stone, its surface covered in strange symbols that I couldn't decipher. I felt a deep sense of unease as I approached the stone, drawn to it despite the voice in my head screaming at me to turn back. The air around the stone was different, heavier, charged with a strange energy that made my skin tingle. As I reached out to touch the stone, a sharp, cold wind whipped through the clearing, extinguishing my flashlight. The rustling sound returned, louder now, circling the clearing, getting closer and closer. I fumbled for the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold on to it. The rustling stopped suddenly, replaced by a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I turned in the direction of the sound, and in the dim light of the dying day I saw them. Shadowy figures, barely visible but unmistakably there. They moved silently, gliding across the ground, their forms shifting and changing as they approached. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, were fixed on me, unblinking and cold. The figures closed in, their growls growing louder, more menacing. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by an unseen force. I could feel their cold breath on my neck, their whispers filling my ears with words I couldn't understand but that filled me with a deep, primal terror. I fought to escape, but their grip was too strong, pulling me down, dragging me into the darkness. Just when I thought it was over, the light of the flashlight flickered back to life, casting a dim, feeble glow across the clearing. The shadows recoiled, hissing and snarling as the light touched them. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from their grasp and ran. Ran as fast as I could, not caring where I was going. After what felt like hours, I burst out of the hollow and back onto the familiar trail. The oppressive weight lifted instantly, the sounds of the forest returning as if nothing had happened. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. I never spoke of that day to anyone. The forest is still a place I love, but I know better now. Some places are better left unexplored, their secrets buried deep within the earth. I haven't returned to Black Hollow, and I never will.